Hello and welcome to a very special edition of VLGA Connect. It's our first ever CEO Roundtable, and we've brought together from across the sector some CEOs along with Kathryn Arndt from the VLGA to talk about the issues that CEOs are currently dealing with as we move from, hopefully, pandemic mode into recovery mode. What is, I was going to say, the new normal? But perhaps, as a friend of mine has been talking about recently, perhaps we should be looking at what is the better normal. So to help us with the conversation today, firstly, Kathryn Arndt, CEO of the VLGA, welcome back.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to see you today. And I would like to thank Carol, Sarah and Martin for joining us today on VLGA Connect. These programs are all about connecting with the sector more broadly and also just sharing some of the stories, learnings, and also opportunities and challenges that we're facing as a sector at the moment. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Indeed, well said. So we understand you all are very busy, have full schedules, so we do really appreciate you giving us some of your time today to talk about these issues, which I'm sure are all very top of mind for you. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Sarah Philpott, the CEO of Mildura Rural City Council. Sarah's been the CEO there since August of last year, has a 20-year background in local government, but also private sector and state government experience in the justice sector. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, great to be here.
Good to have you. Martin Cutter is CEO at Greater Geelong City Council, has been since June of 2018 with 15 years or more experience in local government, previously in senior roles at the City of Melbourne and in private business for a considerable time before that. Martin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Great to see you. And lovely to see Carol Jeffs, the CEO at Cardinia Shire Council, has been in the role since October of 2018. Again, over 15 years in senior local government roles, previously at Port Phillip and La Trobe. Lovely to have you joining us, Carol.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and we want to have an open, broad-ranging, robust discussion about the issues that you're dealing with today. And I'll just throw a couple of thought starters your way to get us underway. I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Yarwood, the former mayor of the city of Adelaide, who makes his living today as an urban futurist. And I've gotten to know Stephen pretty well over the years. And I was just reading a thought leadership piece from him this morning, which is arguing we shouldn't be talking about a new normal after COVID-19. We should be talking about a better normal and what that might look like. And some of the things that resonated with me was he observes the highlight to the need to understand how density will change, and with it the importance of main streets and local communities. And local government has a key role in that. In fact, he says all three levels of government should be working hand in hand with developers and communities, obviously, as we define that better normal. Is that the sort of issue that is yet exercising your minds as CEOs in local government, or are we just too still stuck in pandemic mode to think about that? What's your thoughts?
Look, yes, some of those things are exercising our minds, but I would kind of rate this pandemic as a sort of masterclass in adaptive leadership. So we are definitely flicking between short-term, longer-term, community, internal health and safety of staff and a whole range of things. And even though Cardinia Shire is a metro council, we are on the outer edge, and I have started to hope that this will bring some decentralisation and reinvigorate regionalism in Victoria. So that's what's been exercising my mind. I don't think it's made its way to serious discussions with councillors, but certainly in South East Melbourne, we'll be starting to think about that very soon.
And I guess being an election year with the potential for councillors to change, it's discussions are going to have to be ongoing and perhaps had twice after October as well too. Sarah, I'll come to you in a second about that regionalism aspect, but I just wanted to get Martin's perspective, seeing as he had a thought ready to go.
That's all right. Look, I'd agree with Carol. It's been an incredibly dynamic environment we've worked in. I mean, early on, it was very much about trying to work out how you manage your workforce, and we're still in that mode. starting to think going to look like, and how are you going to manage that sort of change with your community? And I think with the change, with also being the dynamic of a local council election coming up, there are two streams of thoughts going on, and it is quite an interesting mix to manage. We're also obviously looking at, we're in the process of starting to commence building a new building, and it'll be finished in 2022. So we're really trying to make decisions about what that office will look like, that has got significant cost implications about how you structure that office. So, where do you think we're going to be in 2 years' time? And that's what is taking a lot of energy and mental capacity from our perspective as well, because the decisions you make now have got to be in line with where you think you're going to be in that 2 years' time. So it's something that we're giving a lot of thought to. But from a community perspective, how the city will look, again, I think it proves again we really need to be very much focused on public transport, but obviously being with that social distancing is an interesting dynamic, because people will drive people back into cars, and I would say Geelong has been a car city, and it needs to be focused very much how we actually make ourselves do better from that public transport and bike sort of transport mode.
That's a really interesting point, designing a building and needing to understand how much of the working from home and the telecommuting that we've got now is still going to be with us. So how do you make that judgment, do you think, Martin?
But trying to actually say, well, where do we really want to be? Like, what do we actually want the office to be? And it's not, it's actually a proactive decision-making process where you are going to say, well, this is going to be different. It's not like we will just revert back to what we were. We can actually make judgments now and build it for that work flexibility arrangements. So we have to make those calls. We've got a great team of people that is really spending a lot of time and saying it is going to be different. You can't stick your head in the sand and say it will be the same as it was. So we're going to start looking at how that sort of percentage of working people from home, rotation of teams, which we're all doing, but I've got to physically make some changes and decisions now for 2 years hence. So it's about trying to make sure you're devoting the right time now to allow those decisions to be made as part of the planning process over the next 2 years.
So Sarah, as a CEO of a rural city council with obviously urban and rural aspects, how's the working from home and the technology capability been for you?
Yeah, good question. Actually, as an organisation, we made the transition to working from home relatively smoothly, surprisingly. We were very fortunate because only probably 18 months or so ago, we made some changes to our technology, and we would not have been in this position had we not done that. So we were very, fortunate in terms of timing. We had some patches of difficulty for people in terms of internet access and so on, but substantially that's been not too bad on the whole. I think that these issues do exacerbate distance in our community. So with 22,000 square kilometres, and our furthest away community is Murrayville, which is about 2.5 hours drive. You're basically, everyone's working from home and socially distancing those connections. It's harder to maintain because, for instance, I would try and get down to Oyen and catch up with people in that centre, but with it being closed and so on, you don't have as much connection to your people or to your communities. But I do think it's been very interesting for us as well, just recognising how, like the others, how we deal with this in terms of as an organisation and with our workforce, how we try and talk with our community, work with our businesses and do all of those things in the face of this. So we're like Carol, I think we're, and Martin, in that phase of being right in the moment, still dealing with stuff, as we bring services back on and so on. So you're right in the business and also trying to plan and think for the future. So you have to have lots of different hats on all at once.
Kathryn?
And Chris, I think exactly what Sarah's highlighted there came up yesterday at the LGV CEO forum, and Martin, you'll recall the conversation, how difficult or challenging it is for some of the smaller rural regional councils with the restrictions still being in place that requires staff who can work from home to do so. And that does present some challenges for those smaller councils, as Sarah's also highlighted.
So, Carol, I've had the pleasure of seeing the magnificent council building that you have at Cardinia Shire, which was based, correct me if I'm wrong, on an activity-based working model of operation. Do you feel like you've been way ahead of the curve in terms of being able to respond to this recent situation with that, or has it been found wanting in some way?
Well, Chris, largely we have felt ahead of the curve, and I can't take credit for that because it was already there when I arrived. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure my IT team would say different, but really was a matter of pick up your laptops and don't come back tomorrow. So we were already fully flexible in our working environment, and that really, really helped. We did have some challenges though when we were sort of on the way out, if you like, in that transition, and there are questions now about coming back to the office. So activity-based working, some people confuse it with hot desking. It's not exactly the same. And so there were questions about, well, can we continue ABW during this environment, particularly in the transition with distancing and needing to keep hygienic practices and so forth. But we found a way around it. And we're really happy with how that worked.
I want to put a notion to you that I was reading about just very recently, that for leaders at the moment, we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That discomfort is now a permanent state, and you really can't ever feel like you're 100% in control of your environment. Do you agree with that premise as a panel? And is that just simply the way things are going to be now forever?
I'll go first. I think the answer to that, Chris, is yes. What I've been really pleased about, and I'm certain Sarah and Carol say the same, the resilience of the workforce to adapt to the change has been nothing short of sensational. I came into it thinking that I'm going to work from home from only for 3 or 4 weeks. I went and bought a Bunnings table for $49, and I'm still sitting on the same Bunnings table after 3.5 months. But trying to make sure that your staff still feel energised, motivated, are doing appropriate work has been nothing short for me of a really reaffirming of how good the organisation is and how healthy the organisation is. And you do, and I'm certain our other CEOs would agree, you worry all the time about your employees and are they okay and how they're managing it. And I think mental health through this is what's really something that we're all worried about. And I guess it's such a different environment to do that. I think it's the uncertainty for people that worry them. And we're trying now to give them some certainty about when, some of the normality will return. But when you're not in control of all levers, you feel uncertain yourself. What I always say to our group is that, you never stop learning, but you need to be ready to adapt to change. And I think the industry, all local government has done that, because I'm certain the issues that I'm facing are the same issues that Sarah and Carol are also facing. And that resilience of our staff has been something I've taken great comfort in. Something
you said there that I'm really keen to explore, perhaps with Carol or Sarah, that was around this feeling that you're worried about your people. You can't see them face to face. What are some tricks or strategies that you're using to try and keep that engagement, that connection?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to talk about that. I agree with what Martin said. I'm acutely aware of the health and safety of our people and how they're kind of travelling, because we not only have the office people who are working from home, but we've got our people still out in the field, our maternal and child health nurses, people in the very much front facing and in, health related services. So it's a really tangible kind of risk that you're managing, as well as that risk around culture and how people feel. So, so being really proactive about the occupational health and safety aspects of it is something that you can be quite deliberate about, and that is something you kind of do get a bit of control around. But we've been really working to try and communicate lots and regularly. So lots and lots of emails, which drive people mad, I'm sure, but I'd rather over-talk than not talk and have people feel like they don't know what's going on. We've also been, the exec team's been joining virtual meetings all over the place, going to the 6:30 toolbox time, out in the freezing cold with the depot with everyone 1.5 metres away, so you need a megaphone, all of those kinds of techniques, I think, just to stay connected. And I think one of the things I've had lots of feedback about is, as Martin said, it is uncertain, and as leaders you don't have all the answers. And I actually think you know, sometimes I've shared that, you know, said to people, look, I don't know the answer here, or I'm not certain, or, you know, I might feel a particular way. It makes me feel uncertain. And I think people kind of connect to that it's okay. Like, people are accepting of the fact that you don't necessarily know. It's about being, you know, honest about what you do and don't have control over. And I think people have enjoyed getting a kind of sense of connection from a leadership perspective in that regard as well. So, and that's been very rewarding for me too, you know, just to hear back from people that people are going okay, and, you know, they feel like they're doing a good job still for the community.
It's occurred to me a couple of times over the past few months how difficult it must be if you need to onboard people into your organisation in a virtual sense. Have any of you had to deal with that, and how challenging that must be?
Yeah, Chris, we've certainly slowed our recruitment, as many other councils may have done, but we're still onboarding some people. We've just transitioned our induction to online, so we have our executive team drop in and have lunch, as we usually do, with the new people, answer their questions and that sort of thing. So we just had one late last week, and the new people were saying how wonderful it was. They felt very welcomed and so forth. And just picking up on your previous question, I agree with what Martin and Sarah said in terms of communication and so forth. We've just implemented a new wellbeing program internally. So that's we were going to do it anyway, and we've just again transitioned it to an online platform. And there's 5 of us on our executive team. We've each taken one of the wellbeing platforms, and we're a kind of advocate or sponsor for that. So that's something that we've done. And I know other councils have done something similar as well.
Oh, look, I just wanted to reflect on your comment that, around the discomfort of the leadership roles as an ongoing concept. So I guess I'd challenge that and suggest that it comes with the territory anyway. There's just different trigger points in different types of environments. And I think, you know, Sarah, Carol and Martin have all touched on some of the strategies they've used to do things such as the onboarding, but also delegating in this environment requires some fairly considered thinking as well, because when we are being required to be so agile and very quick to adapt, which the sector has done, you know, immensely well, it's very hard sometimes to take a step back and start to delegate some of those duties and empower your staff to continue to do that. So it was interesting to hear, Sarah, you talk about some of the strategies that your team leaders are using. One of the things I wanted to explore a little bit more today with you all, and Martin, you touched on this, was not only are we now in this new world, but we're in the process of implementing a new Local Government Act, and we're leading into an election in October. And I wonder from you, what sort of challenges or issues is that presenting for you in your roles?
I'll go first again, but I think, again, we're all very much in the same boat here. You're looking at what's got to be achieved by a certain date, and you have a project plan that allows you to look at those milestones and implement, I guess, processes and things that need to be done by a certain time. So it still comes down to project planning, and then being adaptable within that project plan about what needs to be achieved. And, you know, with local government elections, we're all very much in the same boat in regards to that. They've got great support from VLGA, MAV, Local Government Victoria, who help, I mean, obviously they drive a lot of that process in itself, and the support through councillor training and all those sorts of aspects, and the implementation of the new Local Government Act. We're getting great support through that. You've obviously got to have good staff as well, so good staff around governance and around what's required through that. And, you know, if you don't have that, and what I've learned over the years is that it's such an important, such a critical aspect of local government, because it is it's a very complex area. It's a complex legislative environment. We have elected officials. It's a dynamic environment, and you need to be really on top of councillors. You're also trying to give comfort to the community who wants to actually move forward and be part of a new a new council. So making sure that you're out there promoting what's required ahead of the game and having an appropriate project plan, I think is what's most important.
Do you think there's an opportunity for, and you touched on it when you talked about the complexity of the environment and the legislative responsibilities. One of the things that the VLGA in particular is keen to try and do through our candidate workshops is really upskill the knowledge of future councillors, those people in the community who are thinking about running as running for council, because one of the observations that I've certainly made is not all of the voters in the community nor the potential candidates are fully across the scope and complexity of the business of local government. And that, of course, presents challenges for you in your roles when candidates are elected and then come on to council. So it'll be quite a complex time, I imagine, after the October elections, with councillors coming into what will be sort of the end of we hope, a COVID-19 plus the implementation stages of a new act.
Yeah, look, I agree it is complex, but it always is. And I appreciate what you're saying, Kathryn, about candidates and skills and so forth. But I guess there are new provisions in the Act which we will need to find a way to implement this time. I agree with Martin. I think for us, once the election was announced, there's been a level during this time, a level of pragmatism and decisiveness that's needed. And so it's really like, okay, switch on that plan, get that happening, really think about what can be done, and also leveraging off the great resources that we're provided from VLGA and others during this time. So I personally have found this time a little challenging from a community connection point of view. So, you know, I often attend community meetings or club meetings if I'm invited and things like that, and celebrations, and I've been missing that a bit because you do sort of lose a little bit of touch with what's going on in your community. But from an internal and preparation point of view, the other thing I'd say is that we have that was the moment when, as an executive team and the broader leadership, we looked at each other and said, well, okay, we need to cycle through some annual leave now, so that we're fresh and we're ready for when the new council comes on board. So it was a moment of, you know, decision to turn our minds to that community focus in the new council.
Yeah, look, I think similar really, we're just underway. You know, having clarity around the election means you just get cracking, you know, preparing for induction, preparing for all that you need to. I think it will be interesting though, because there will be some new provisions. You know, our governance teams and our executive team are kind of well versed in the current, and so bringing on a new council and recognising just some you know, earlier changes around some of the intentions of the Act and, you know, conflict provisions and so on might mean that we're not quite as fluid in it as we would normally be in induction, just because there's some learning for us as well. But I agree. I think it's essentially the election cycle is what it is, and you know, that role that we might play in actively encouraging really good candidates in our community will be really interesting. And I think what happens as well, of course, at the moment, so we're coming through pandemic, we're going through budgets that are trying to respond to that. There's going to be, I'm expecting quite a bit of community feedback about how all of that feels, and I think that will play out potentially in an election context, but that is kind of what it is. The other thing I think that's been of real value is, you know, there are good networks not only through like VLGA and LG Pro and so on, but also CEO networks. And what I've seen is a real uptick over this time, this COVID kind of time where we're all locked away, of sharing of resources and information and kicking ideas around. And I think that's got real value. Certainly for me as a new CEO, this is my first CEO role, I have valued that so much because there's so much experience out there that you can draw on, and that real sense, again, that we can learn from each other, I think's got value, not only in these times, but any time. I just feel like it's been heightened in the current circumstances.
It occurred to me while you've all been talking about the challenges, particularly Carol mentioned the challenges of maintaining that community connection. With the new engagement principles that are coming out of the Act, the deliberative engagement requirements that are going to be imposed, with a new council needing to do visioning, council plan, other strategic documents that require a level of deliberative engagement. Bear with me here. If you look at the numbers this week, you could argue that the working from home directive is going to be here for quite some time again yet. Perhaps the social distancing requirements are going to be in place for quite some time, right up until there's a vaccine potentially. Is anyone giving thought to how can you effectively engage in a deliberative way when you've got to keep such distance from the people that you need to be engaging with? It's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
We're thinking of online adaptation, which I'm sure many councils are. And also just, again, that sort of, it will be the first time for all of us, or actually some councils have been doing this already, so it won't be the first time for everyone. The Cardinia, it will be the first time. It'll be the first time for a total refresh for a new council with a new council plan. And so I think it will be challenging, Chris, and we have probably had to come to terms with this first one won't be our best one ever. We're going to do what we need to do, engage as best we can. And again, we've just launched 6 months ago a new online engagement platform. So what we're finding, as everyone, is that your software is being stretched to its ultimate uses rather than the 10% that you usually use, and we'll be doing that.
Yeah, we're still kind of working our way through also how we adapt the way we've always done things to thinking about some new ways of doing some of this stuff. So I think we're still very much figuring that out, working our way through what it actually means and how we might do it. The other thing that I think, Chris, is a bit of a challenge, as you've recognised, so much is likely to be online because of the social distancing, but we've also got a community where we don't have equal access for people in terms of those kinds of resources. So how do we make sure that engagement, just by virtue of its method, doesn't be, that's not very good English, isn't excluding. So that's, that's a piece still to work through. And, I think there'll be lots of challenges in it, but, it would be boring. We don't want to not live in a not challenged environment. We want to keep having to learn new things ourselves and stretch ourselves. So there are days where you wonder whether that's just a bit too much stretch, but others we think, we're up for it, let's go.
Absolutely. Oh, and look, I guess at a different level too, for councillors themselves adapting to that new way of engaging with, their constituents will be something that some councillors are better than others. So do you see that there, I guess, will be a need for greater support for councillors themselves in that community engagement piece and how they can do that through different ways?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely. Every council you get, it's a different council, but at the same, they're very similar. They all need support, they all need help, and they all need information. And our job, I guess, is to be adaptable and flexible enough to actually vary those levels of engagement and various ways of helping each individual councillor. It will be interesting to see, I think, in this environment, the turnover of councillors. I'm not sure whether I have a view whether it'll be more or less, but it will be interesting to see whether the COVID environment and engagement in face-to-face aspects out in the community will help or hinder existing candidates or new candidates. I don't really have a view, so I'm very interested. It's like, the other thing is, it's like watching a social experiment, isn't it? We're in it every day, and each country's different, and to a certain extent, each state's different. So you in some ways, I can't get enough of it. I keep absorbing all the information, and it's a bit like a drug. I want more of it. Tell me more and more and more. Who's still better than me, and I think one of the points that I think Sarah made before, the collaborative aspect between the CEOs of the local government of Victoria is nothing short. You don't have any other peers other than obviously the people that are running the same sorts of organisations, and the freedom of information between all councils has been nothing short of sensational. So I know I've really appreciated it.
Yes, Kathryn, go.
And I guess just on that, here's an opportunity for the sector to continue and engage in that way, and being able to do it over Zoom and other platforms means that we can do it probably better and more often than we did before. So I think that that's one of the positives that's come out of this. Absolutely.
And Kathryn, perhaps if I can tip in there as somebody who's about 6.5 hours away from Melbourne, you know, the prospect of being able to dial into a 1 or 2 hour meeting and not lose a couple of days of productivity is just fantastic. You know, I mean, we're very fortunate here in Mildura because we've got, well, in the normal course of events, there's great flights and, you know, all of those kinds of things. But you do still, you know, chew up days in travel over, you know, to be an active participant in things that I think are really valuable. So if there's a thing I'd like to see stick, it's the, you know, using these kinds of conversations, because I've actually felt more connected in many ways as a consequence of this. And the fact that we've just all had to adapt and use the technology has meant that as someone who's a long way away from everywhere else, that has been a real bonus. And I think that is one of the lasting changes I think we will see potentially, is our opportunity for not just for myself, but also for our whole organisation to participate in some different ways, as long as a sector we continue to use this kind of technology.
We are running short on time, and I wanted to ask a couple of leadership related questions. So it strikes me, looking at your experience, all of you have more than local government in your background. And it used to be a sector where that local government experience was prized over everything else, and it was harder to break into the sector. My sense is that isn't the case anymore. And I wonder whether that breadth of experience, different experiences, different sectors, etc., has been a strength in leading through the recent times of uncertainty and change.
I might start. I actually think it's all of the experience. You know, the local government experience that I've had has been immensely valuable to help me through this time, as has my other experience. So for me, it's really the combination. I would not have wanted to be a new CEO in local government without the years of experience in local government in these current circumstances, because I think you would have no clue what was going on. Well, sorry, not no clue, but it would be much more complicated, I think. So I think the combination of experience is really valuable. There's no doubt that having had some time in different sectors does bring different perspectives, and that you understand then, you know, spending a little bit of time in state government means that I kind of get how the estimates processes work, and, you know, all of those things, what ticks the boxes in the political context. You know, those kinds of experiences are immensely valuable when you bring them back into local government. So for me, it's not one over the other, but more how it rounds you out.
Well, it's a really interesting question. So broadly, I think I agree with Sarah, but I've had a hugely diverse and broad leadership experience in local government. So I think it's one of the very unique and very special things about local government is the breadth of technical areas that you can work and lead in. But also I've been very fortunate to have some extraordinary leadership opportunities to learn in all different environments within local government. So hard question to answer, but so broadly, yes. But look, I feel very fortunate to have had the breadth of experience I've had in local government.
Thanks, Chris. And from my point of view, you know, I think I've been lucky to have, I guess, a background that did have some government background before coming into local government. But I would say that I'm still learning after 15 years, but certainly the first 2 or 3 years was the most hardest to turn your mind into exactly how local government works, and it takes them a while to understand that. And I can see it that they're better now than they were, say, 12 months ago, which is what you'd expect. But the nuances of local government are different to any industry you work in. I mean, I came from a background of a shipping company. Obviously, it was owned by the federal government for many, many years. But there are commonality about government-related aspects. But that's shipping. Shipping's a completely different business to local government. But as I said, I'm still learning, and I think I'll be learning until the time I retire, whenever that might be.
If I can put you on the spot, all of you, to finish off, if you could give one to, there's a lot of aspiring leaders that watch these programs, and I suspect particularly this particular program. If there was one leadership lesson, perhaps from the last 3-4 months of working through this situation, that you could give to aspiring leaders, what would it be?
I think you've got to still be decisive, but you can't wait to make decisions to get all the facts. I think you're not going to get everything now. You need to make a decision, and you might stuff it up, but rarely is it fatal. You just have to keep moving forward and move on to the next decision, and then be adaptable. If you've made a mistake, back up the vehicle a little bit, take a sideways movement, and come forward again. So you've got to be adaptable, but you've got to make decisions.
You're not suggesting CEOs are human too, are you, Arndt?
Oh no, very human.
Sarah?
Well, what Martin said, but actually I was thinking more probably on a personal note. I think it's these are kind of testing times for everybody. We've all had to adapt and, you know, think about new ways of doing things and learn more about yourself as a leader. So I think it's kind of the digging deep thing and getting to understand your own dimensions of leadership as well, and working out where best to put yourself in that, and how to, for me, there's always an issue of balance. Like, you know, I've actually probably had to find more balance now as a consequence of these circumstances than I have before. So I think it's about that kind of the personal journey of leadership and what you learn in these circumstances, as well as those more, you know, practical leadership things.
Mine's a bit of a personal one as well, because I'm reflecting in the first few weeks of this, when something was happening every 2 hours and there were decisions to be made. And then as a CEO, probably would say, as I should be, thinking ahead the next couple of months, but my team was still at the doing phase. So my main kind of leadership lesson has been one of mindfulness. And it is harder without being face to face. You miss a lot of body language cues and sometimes looks on faces and things a little bit. So deliberately being mindful about where everyone's at. Is everyone on the bus? Are we all on the right page, on the same page? And are we ready to take that next step, has been a key thing for me, because you know, I'm a strategic thinker. I was already thinking about the new normal, the better normal in week 3, but being mindful about where everybody's at, and counsellors and community, I think has been a sort of consolidating lesson for me.
Look, thank you all. That's been just a fascinating discussion. I wish we could talk for much longer, but alas, you have other things to do, as do we. Kathryn, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
On the question that you asked, I thought for me, you know, it's about that authenticity, and also what Martin said, and I hope that one of the things that we do continue to do, and I've noticed it through the meetings that I have with senior bureaucrats and ministers, that, you know, the suits are off, they're, you know, the integrity agencies are dialing in from home to talk to me in their polo shirts, and there's that human element that has come through, that authentic, we're all in it together, and the honesty that comes with that, without being tied up necessarily in the bureaucracy and the pomp and circumstance, and being able to move quickly. Yes, mistakes may be made, but it's about continuing to move forward together. And I hope that we can hold on to that.
Nicely said. Thank you all. Carol Jeffs from Cardinia Shire, Sarah Philpott from Mildura Rural City, and Martin Cutter of the City of Greater Geelong. Thank you very much for your time and your insights today. Great to have you with us. And Kathryn Arndt, of course, as always, CEO of the VLGA. We hope you've enjoyed this very special, our first virtual roundtable with local government CEOs here on VLGA Connect.